Hello and welcome back to another episode of Schlyde into Sports. Today we're briefly going to talk about college football and the shakeup in the rankings, my rankings, and then we're going to slide into swimming, taking a deep dive into the mid-season meets and how they can impact the November rankings and more. All right, so this was not a good weekend for my Pick'em 10, to say the least. I had probably my worst record and went 2 for 8. And I literally went like 9-1 a couple weeks ago. So that amazing turnaround, I guess. But why? Well, looking back last week, I did talk about like taking risks and made some fun, interesting picks. Those being like Penn State upsetting Michigan and Ole Miss upsetting Georgia, which were both wrong. However, the picks that I thought for sure, like that were going to be sure things, like Kansas over Texas Tech, Fresno State over San Jose State, and Oklahoma State over UCF, were the ones that I should have taken a risk on, as Oklahoma State got blown out by UCF, Fresno State lost to San Jose State, and Kansas lost in the last second to Texas Tech. For this week, I'm going to announce my pick 'em picks on Friday in a live stream just because I want to get to swimming. That'll probably be around like mid-afternoon. There'll be more information on that coming out soon. This week, the AP poll rankings, again, the top 8 remain the same, starting with Georgia, Michigan, Ohio State, Florida State, Washington, Oregon, Texas, and Bama. Louisville moves into the 9th spot, making their first top 10 appearance this year. Oregon State moves to 10th. Missouri moves up to 11th after a huge win against Tennessee. They just absolutely destroyed them. Penn State falls to 12th. Ole Miss falls to 13th after getting crushed by Georgia. Oklahoma moves up to 14th. LSU moves into the 15th spot. Utah falls to 16th after a loss to Washington. Tulane and JMU move up to 17th and 18th, respectively. Arizona moves into the 19th spot. Notre Dame moves up to 20th, despite having a bye week. Tennessee falls to 21st. North Carolina moves to 22nd. Kansas State stays in the 23rd spot. Oklahoma State falls to the 24th spot, which is crazy because they literally went from unranked to like 14th or something like that, and then they fall all the way back down. Just amazing how quickly things can change. And Liberty stays at 25. My rankings for the top 8 also, I'm going to just leave those the same because all those teams did what they were supposed to do, and I don't think I don't think there needs to be any change right now for the top 8 for my rankings. I also have Louisville at 9 after their win against Virginia. I have Missouri at 10 after crushing Tennessee. Oregon State at 11. Penn State falls to 12 after getting ran over by Michigan. And I say ran over because Michigan did not throw the ball at any point during the second half and ran 32 run plays. They only had 3 passing plays in the entirety of the game. Those were in the first half. And I did see online that people were saying, oh, why didn't Michigan throw the ball? They don't trust their QB. Well, if you watch the game, when Michigan was throwing the ball, you saw that Penn State's biggest strength in that game was the pass rush. So what Michigan did was at half, they made an adjustment to run the ball because Michigan has a good run game and Penn State doesn't have as good of a run defense as a pass defense. So by doing that, they took away Penn State's biggest strength. So, Michigan must have taken some advice from Leanne Tui because they ran the dang ball. I have Utah at 13. Didn't really want to punch them after losing to a higher-ranked opponent like Washington. Ole Miss falls to 14, and I only moved him down because of the way they lost to Georgia. Tennessee at 15, even after the Missouri loss, but I can see some teams jumping them next week unless Tennessee has a good stand against Georgia this weekend. I have Arizona at 16, LSU 17, Oklahoma State at 18, JMU 19, Oklahoma 20, Liberty 21, Notre Dame at 22, Tulane 23, North Carolina 24, and after a great game against Rutgers, I have decided to put Iowa in my rankings at 25. because they scored more than 10 points. Yay, Iowa. I'm going to go into more details on that as well in the stream. Right now, we got to slide into swimming because there's a lot to get to. All right, let's start off with announcing the top 25 men's and women's teams because the November rankings did come out a few days ago. So for the men, starting at 25, we have, so working from 25 up to 1, we have Kentucky, then Bama, Purdue, SMU, Miami. 20 is Mizzou, USC at 19, then Wisconsin, Michigan, Louisville, and then Texas A&M at 15, Notre Dame 14, and then Auburn, Ohio State, Virginia. Georgia comes in at 10th, Virginia 9, Stanford 8, then Tennessee, Texas, NC State, and then Indiana starts the top 4 with Florida at 3, Cal at 2, and Arizona State on top of the men's teams. And for the women, at 25 is Auburn, then Purdue, LSU, Bama, Minnesota, and Texas A&M at 20, Miami at 19, then Virginia Tech, Arizona State, Duke, Michigan, then Georgia at 14, North Carolina at 13, Wisconsin, USC, and then Stanford at 10th, then Cal, Indiana, Tennessee, Florida, with NC State, starting at 5, Ohio State at 4, Louisville 3, Texas 2, and Virginia on top in the women's swimming and diving. All these teams are going to be competing in these midseason meets, which could really shake up the rankings, and these are all going to take place like around November 5th, like that weekend of November 15th through the 17th. So the first invite that I'm going to kind of look at is the Art Adamson Invitational, hosted by Texas A&M, with the teams going being USC, TCU, LSU, Bama, Air Force, Houston, and Washington State. The top 25 teams from the men's side that are going to be there are Bama, USC, and Texas A&M. And for the women, it's going to be LSU, Bama, Texas A&M, and USC. Because of these head-to-head matchups, we can really see the difference in prep for this meet as well as how they'll measure up with each other. Prep for this meet is going to kind of show us how they're going to prepare, how they're possibly going to prepare for NCAAs, how they're going to like do their relays. And this is especially true at this meet because all of these teams, all these top 25 teams that are competing at this meet are really close in rank to each other. So it's going to be a very fierce battle between all of those teams to see who comes out on top on both sides. The second invite we're going to look at is the NC State GAC Invitational, which is hosted by NC State at the GAC, which is the Greensboro Aquatic Center. We have a top 5 matchup for the men at this invite in NC State and Arizona State, and top 25 matchups in Arizona State, Duke, and NC State for the women. Arizona State and NC State have already competed in a dual meet against each other earlier this year. Arizona won on the men's side and NC State won on the women's side. So it should be interesting to see what happens in the invite setting. Arizona State, I believe, also hosted the dual meet. So it should be interesting going into NC State territory to see if that environment is going to bring any challenges to the Sun Devils as they go in to hold their own against NC State. Third invite, this is probably the biggest meet, I think, just looking at all of them. It's the Ohio State invite, which is hosted by, obviously, Ohio State because it's in the name. The quality of teams at this invite is insane for both the men and the women. At some of the invite, there's sometimes an imbalance between the men's and women's teams. Like sometimes the higher caliber women's teams go to the meets, like go to one invite, and then the men are just there as well, and they just happen to be competing at the same time, and vice versa. And sometimes like the competition between the men's and women's teams, like just because of the rivalry between like the men's team from one school and another school could be different than the rivalry between the women's teams from those same schools, just because of how close they are in like times and stuff like that. The top 25 teams for the women that are going to be at this meet are Ohio State, Indiana, Miami, and Virginia Tech. And for the men, there's Indiana, Ohio State, Virginia Tech, Notre Dame, Kentucky, and Miami. So that's a lot of top 25 teams competing at one meet together. And this should be interesting, too, because last year for the Big Ten Championships, it was split between Ohio State and Indiana, with Ohio State winning on the women's side and Indiana winning on the men's side. And for the runners-up at both those meets, Ohio State got second in the men's standings when Indiana got first. And for the women's, the Hoosiers got second when the Buckeyes won. So this is really going to be a big Big Ten battle. And with other high-caliber teams that are there, this is going to be a very competitive and hostile meet for sure. You're going to see a lot of good times coming out of there. Next invite on the docket is the Georgia invite, with 3 top 25 teams going at it on both the men's and women's side. And they're all from the same schools. Those teams being Georgia, Auburn, and Florida. These teams are also all in the SEC, so it's going to be a little bit of a preview for what the SEC championship is going to look like in a few months. The other teams that are going to be attending the meet are Georgia Tech and Florida State, who are both in the ACC. But those are the only 5 teams that are going to this meet, so it's one of the smaller invites. But there's still going to be a lot of good times coming out of this meet with the 3 top 25 schools that are competing, especially with the in-conference rivalry. Another invite happening the same weekend is the Purdue Invitational. The top men's and women's programs participating are Purdue and Louisville, and they could maybe shake up the rankings depending on the times they put up. I think they could be sneaky teams just because, like when you look at the meet, yeah, there's a lot of mid-major schools that are going to be there, but their times, like since they're competing at the same time as other schools, they're still going to be looking to put up some good times and to move up a couple spots in the rankings. Next invite is the Tennessee invite. That's also going to have some top 25 teams there. For the men, those will be Tennessee, Virginia, and Michigan. And for the women, you have Tennessee, Michigan, Virginia, and North Carolina. Tennessee, they're hosting, but they're probably going to be keeping their eyes on the on that Georgia meet as well while they're competing at this meet. And I know like from my experience, like when I swam in high school, at least like for conference and sectionals, I remember we would always look at Meet Mobile and look at the other conference meets going on or the other sectionals meets going on to try to get an idea right away what the state meet was going to look like, so that way we can have as much preparation as possible. So I'm sure Tennessee is probably going to be doing the same thing at this meet, looking at the Georgia invite. Michigan's probably going to be looking at the Ohio State invite to try to get an idea for what the relays of the other teams are going to look like. These are probably the biggest invites for college swimming for both the men and the women. There are some great showdowns that are about to happen, teams close in rank, in-conference battles and rivalries, and this is where the majority of teams will be competing in like the same general time period of the day. Like the meets aren't separated by like a week or 2 weeks or more. So, we're also going to see some relay orders that might be used at the NCAA championships this year. A lot of the dual meets are more trial and error when it comes to relays, just because you can enter more relays in those dual meets. and because you're only competing against one team, you can kind of experiment a little bit with like the order, or like with the medley relays, you can like mess around with who swims what stroke. And a lot of and then you have a general idea of what those teams look like also based on last year's championships, because you see who's there's going to be returning swimmers, obviously, so you're going to be able to kind of use that data as well. But the mid-season invites are really where you get your first indication of where the teams are at. And then you're going to get a more solid ranking. Like, you're going to get more solid rankings after this weekend of swimming. Then there's the regular rivalry dual meets, like Arizona versus Arizona State, or like IU versus Purdue, where it's highly competitive. Even though it's a dual meet, it's still going to be highly competitive, and each team is going to be trying to just put each other into the ground. And then there's the conference championships, and then zones championships for diving. And then all of that leads up to the final NCAA championship, which for the men is going to be at the IU Natatorium in Indy, and for the women, it will be at the Ramsey Center in Georgia. All right, to end today's episode, I would like to share a few announcements. First, I said at the end of last episode in a digital message that the first guest was going to be moved to a different date. And that episode, I have a date now. That episode will be recorded December 5th and released December 7th. Second, there will be another college football watch party live stream this Saturday, November 18th, and will be an all-day stream like last time from noon till about 2 a.m. Hopefully, some of the games will actually show up on the screen this time, but we found a way to make it work, so, I mean, it'll be fine. And lastly, I will not be in Bloomington to record the next episode next week, so I've decided that I'm going to do a special episode on Tuesday, November 21st, it's going to be a recorded stream. The stream will be recorded and uploaded to YouTube if you missed the stream and still want to watch. So I'll keep you guys updated on that. I decided to stream Tuesday because Thursday's Thanksgiving, so I guess technically the day, like, we're going to have the day off. Tuesday's also when I normally record, so it'll be just like I'm coming in just like normal. And it is also my birthday that day, and I wouldn't want to spend it any other way. I really like how the first stream went, being able to talk with people about different sports and watch college football. And I just wouldn't want to spend my birthday any other way, because I've been having a blast doing this. So, also, I know you are probably wondering why I haven't really covered a lot of college basketball yet. And it's not because I have anything against college basketball. I love college basketball. It's just that there was a lot of movement in the transfer portal. And yes, some of these games have been crazy, lots of surprise wins. But it takes time for these teams to gel when they have a lot of people coming in and leaving through the transfer portal. I know it is kind of a hot take, but I want to wait and see how the teams gel together after a few weeks, see where things shake up before I make any judgments about how good or bad teams are. Right now, I need them to be more complete in a sense before I can determine whether or not they are good or bad. Gotta let the teams find their rhythm before I determine who's at the top, you know? I mean, especially, like, after looking at the AP poll, like, because you can see the preseason rankings, and it's kind of the same thing with football, too. Like, you see the preseason rankings, and then you see, like, there's teams like Texas A&M that are in the rankings, but then, like, now, like, where's Texas A&M? They're not there. But yeah, no, it's kind of the same thing with basketball. Like, after the preseason, because lots of those stats are based on what last year's teams looks like and the stats of the team, like the stats they put up last year. So, yeah, I don't really rely too much on I don't trust the preseason rankings. Thank you all for tuning in. I hope that you all enjoyed today's episode. The information for the socials is at the end of the video, and I will also put a link in the description that will have a link to all the socials as well, just so that way they're easier to access. Um, there's the link will also have a link to the invite link to join the College Pick'em 10. And I mean, it's not too late to join that. So, I mean, just clicking on the link, and then you just join. It just takes you right to the group. So it's really easy. I'll see you all on Tuesday for the pre-Thanksgiving stream. Time to Schlyde out.